on it, Bobby.
What I want to do, like I said before, is I want to clear up some stuff between the relationship of the Greeks and the Hamites or the Egyptians, now that we have proven that they are black. The Greeks. You see, they were a Phoenician culture. And the Phoenicians was nothing but a branch of pre-dynastic Egyptians. You see, pre-dynastic Egyptians. Now, in this relationship, the reason why several doctrines had to be handed over to the Greeks is because they understood one thing. They understood that hieroglyphics or metaneta was going to be a dead language for close to 2,000 years, for over 2,000 years. So, understanding these priests, understanding that this stuff was going to be a dead language, they had to give certain things to the cultures that would be later cultures, that these later cultures would give the information that will fall in the hands of younger cultures, so even younger cultures than the later cultures. So the Egyptian priests understood we have to further this particular information, which eventually went to the Moors. So let me go back to this, so you can understand this. In this Alexandrian conference that they had, they came up with the truth in the early 1990s. They said that a 100-year period of Greek rule, 100 to 200-year period, mostly about 100 years, they did one thing. They literally translated metaneta, or hieroglyphics, at the Temple of Dendera, the Temple of Isis, Temple of Esna, a Temple of Komombo, and some Ptolemy temples, and the Library of Alexandria. The Egyptian priests. Now, how can a Greek person, how can a person from another culture know what the Hamites are thinking if it's not their language? In order for this stuff to be translated and transferred to the Greeks, it was the Egyptian priests. So for a 100-year period at these particular temples and at the Library of Alexandria, what they did is they translated the metaneta principles, doctrines, and all of the knowledge, a great deal of it, because part of it burned, the Library of Alexandria burnt down twice. But central pieces they had to get off of the mainland of Hemmitt, and they translated metaneta into Greek, Latin, Aramaic, Arabic, Amharic, and all of the central Hebrew, all of the central languages that would be the later day languages that will go out for the future. So that entire area, they translated, the Egyptian priests for 100 years, they translated these particular texts because they understood that metaneta wouldn't survive. You see what I'm saying? And so even the people at the Alexandrian conferences that knew this admitted this in the 1990s. Now even Walter Williams said that the reason, he said that a lot of the cultures around there, they had language they can speak, but they didn't have scripts. So Latin was created by so they would go to Hemmitt, which was the central place of education. And these cultures would travel to Hemmitt. And they would say, well, listen, here's a script that's going to go along with your language. You see, to go along with your language. So the Egyptian priests created scripts, which would be Latin, Greek, Hebrew, or what have you. They created scripts for the central people around that area. Arabic, you see, Arabic. All of these particular texts were nothing but inventions of the Egyptian mystery systems. So Walter Williams talked about that, how they didn't have languages. They would go to Hemmitt and they would give them scripts to go along with their languages. You see what I'm saying? But on the other hand, what they did do with all of these texts, they translated these actual texts from metaneta into these central languages. And that's what the Greeks were there for. Were there for now. And then they also knew that the Romans was coming, which the first years of Rome, the Romans tell you, we're nothing but a spinoff or a later day culture of the Etruscans. Now we got statues of the Etruscans look like Isaac Hayes. You see, and Etruscans was a matriarchal culture. So even that, you see, you know it's a black culture. Right. So the Romans, so now I want to get this straight now. So what we see as central Greek stuff was intentionally given to the Greeks by the Egyptian priests by translating the stuff into Greek and also into Latin. Then the Romans came in, which was a culture that the original Romans were black people, and pretty much like Dr. Asa Hilliard said, and a lot of these scholars, if we was to transport ourselves back to ancient Rome, just like if you go downtown Manhattan, you will see most of the people you would see would be white. But if you go to Harlem, most of the people you see is black. Ancient Rome used to look like Harlem. Because the culture was so old and they had ruled for so, well, they had been a part of civilization so old, black people, Africans, until the central people that you would actually see would be a sea of blackness. So when you see these epic movies that they have, and you see one or two black people in the crowd of a whole sea of white people in Ben-Hur and all these types of Roman movies, Spartacus and different things like that. If you was to actually go back to that particular time, it would be groups of white people, patches of Europeans that migrated into a central black culture. Or you would have a group of people that came together as a Roman Senate and dominated and started ruling over a wide body of people. So it would be like South Africa. The masses of the people are black, but they got these rulers that migrated in. You see what I'm saying? But here go again, we looking at stuff in the modern mind, because I got pictures of Roman families that's black to this day. If you go to Rome, they got nappy hair. You see what I'm saying?
How then was the culture of the Romans so different from that of their predecessors if they were still black people, Egyptian people?
Okay,
the culture and
you know, the culture. Now remember, some of this culture started. It wasn't the central people of the land that was running it. It was these usurpers, just like you would have in South Africa, that had come in. You see what I'm saying? That had come in and started imposing things. Now let me give you an example. They talk about Roman genius, and they did this, the bathhouses and the aqueducts and all of this kind of thing. They said basically the Romans benefited from when they would go into places in Africa and around the ancient world and take slaves, and those slaves would take their technology, they bring them back and they would use their technology to build Rome. So even from the buildings and from anything they did, it wasn't the actual Roman people that did this. This was the people that they colonized. You see, or extrapolated. And these geniuses around the ancient world would come in and build the Roman engineering. You see, the Romans didn't do nothing, but it was just a small body of people that didn't know how to do but one thing: kill people and have people being killed for recreation in the Colosseum. You see what I'm saying? But here's a people that knew how to acquiesce certain material that they had gotten from the ancient people. So, let me give you a classic story. A classic story was that they were dominating the Hebrew people, and at that time, Hebrew people were black people. The white Jew didn't come into the picture until Spain. He was converted into Judaism. So the ones that were nothing but were nothing but Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, which is Upper Egypt, and Upper Egypt is Lower Egypt. You see what I'm saying? Right. So they called the bottom part of Egypt, going into Ethiopia, that was called Upper Egypt. The top part of Egypt they called Lower Egypt. The Lower Egyptians later on became your Hebrews. So we still talking about a branch of Egyptian family. Because even in Hebrew mythology or Hebrew lore, they say that Mizraim is Egypt, and that's one of the tribes of Egypt, tribes of Israel. Then you get the word Is-Ra-El, Isis, Ra, and El, or Al, because one of the names for Horus is Al. So Israel is Isis, Ra, and El, because Ra is also interchangeable as a form of Osiris, because Osiris is the hidden god. When you get the word Amen-Ra, Amen means hidden. So Isis, Ra, and El, son, Horus, Israel. You see what I'm saying? What we're talking about, nothing, just other branches of our family. Whether it's Phoenician, whether it's all of this type of stuff, whether it's Sumerian, we talking about nothing that was not black. Everything was black. Now, in dealing with this, when the Romans was ruling over, they got ruling over Israel. Parts of Israel in Palestine, Jerusalem, what have you. At that time, in order for the people at that time, so they talked about the Roman Senate and the Greeks and the Romans, the birthplace of democracy. But those are later concepts, and those are concepts that was given by the Senate. But the actual people of that land, if you didn't have a central religion or a central system of spirituality, the people would rebel. So what happened was they had these Hebrews in the area that had a proud tradition of whatever they was into based on their religion. So the Roman citizens is going, look, we favor them because these people have a central way of worship, a central way of life based on their religion or based on their system of spirituality. At that particular time, the Roman mythology of Romulus and Remus had fallen into disrepair because the Roman emperors was telling everybody that they were the gods. So you worship Caesar. So as a result, after a couple of 100 years, the actual central theme of mythology started falling into disrepair.
Okay.
And they knew that the Roman people would start to rebel. But then they started seeing the Roman people gravitating to around a new offspring of Hebrewism at that particular time, which was early Christianity, which is different from the Christianity that the Romans did. I'll tell you that in a minute. But they were going to, it was Gnosticism and the Hebrew thing, and the central people in the culture started looking at people outside of Rome as a central aspect of spirituality, and if Rome couldn't convince the people to follow Caesar, then the people would rebel, and Rome would fall. So Rome said, look, we have to get a central religion. They say now, the Egyptians invested in Greece with all these texts. We took over Greece, so now we own all of the texts. So what they did was, they knew that some of the things that the early Christians and the early Hebrews was dealing with wasn't nothing but Egyptian mythology and Egyptian science anyway, and they owned all of those particular texts. And they got together with a series of conferences and put together what we call the Central Christianity now. The only thing was the Central Christianity had a deeper discipline that the Hebrews and those particular early Gnostics and stuff went by. And the Romans say, well, look, some of these things, you know, like not eating pork, or not being able to drink, or certain things. And some of these disciplines, they say, well, look, we will put in the new religion to accommodate the Romans who was used to gluttony. You see, same thing happened in the period of when they was trying to get the European, after the Romans usurped the Christianity and tried to get the Europeans to follow Christianity. The Europeans said, well, look, we'll follow Christianity, but we got to take our festivals and our different practices. You got to incorporate them into Christianity. So all this, these winter solstice and these festivals later on became Christianity, Christmas, and some of these festivals that the Europeans had around that time, they just usurped them and put them into the Christian holidays, made them into Christian holidays. But if you trace them back, if you trace them back, you will see that they were pagan in that particular way, which was some of these festivals.
Right.
So as a result, Rome had to make a central religion of the state, but they had to make a religion that can accommodate the masses of Rome. Just like now, it's easier to be a Christian than a Muslim, or either a Hebrew, or the Jewish thing later on. Why? Because Christianity, you get to do certain things. Mostly, basically, you can do the hell you want as long as you ask the Lord to forgive you.
Right.
You see, and that accommodates. That's why we ask the question, well, if you don't even supposed to eat pork, why do Christians eat pork? Because they said that what the Romans, it goes all the way back to Rome, what the Romans did for the Roman citizens, and they said it was also the Pauline doctrines. You see, Paul was a Roman citizen. Paul was also an agent for Rome.
Right.
You see. So he fashioned a Christianity without the strict doctrines so that the Roman people could acquiesce it. You see what I'm saying? And that's what central Christianity is about, is something that is designed for Roman consumption and later on European consumption.
Correct.
You see what I'm saying? European consumption. Because the African way of it, you start getting into ways of life. Certain things you don't create. And we see this when we see the Christianity. We even see this when we see Judaism, which is ancient, it's a spin-off of ancient Hebrew. It's just that we don't know what them Jews do, but they got all these strict rules and stuff. Well, stuff gotta be kosher. You see what I'm saying? We don't eat no shellfish. You see, so different things like that. But the Romans, they made it so, hey, it could be a party. We can go to the party with this. You see, now going back to the...
Let me ask you though,
yeah.
when they were killing Christians,
right.
These were black people they were killing.
They were black people they was killing, and these were the people that they was usurping their religion from.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? See, they was killing the ones, they said, no, it's just like this. They say, look, we trying to take this religion. But if we got some people that's got practices that's different than the Romans, we got to take them out if we're going to make this religion central and conducive to us. So the ones that they were killing was the original Christians. They're saying that the original Christianity don't even resemble the Christianity that we have now, because original Christianity was a spinoff from the Hebrew aspect, which had a lot of codes and laws. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So those sects that they were killing, it wasn't they were killing Romans, or they were killing people that had the same faith. No, they was trying to cover up the fact that there was groups of people that had another indigenous way of worshiping. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You see, and they had to get rid of this because the Pauline doctrines had much more what you call a pseudo type of practices that the Roman people could get with. You got to realize we're talking about people that used to go to Colosseums just to see black people getting killed. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, we talking about people like Caligula with all kind of perverted sex acts and stuff like that. And we talking about people where a central part of them was gay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And if we got to have a new religion, we're going to have a new religion that can accommodate that gay stuff, and that later on became the Catholic Church.
Wow. Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Now, the original Hebrews say if a man don't have no kids, may he rot. But all of a sudden now the doggone priest went from patriarchs as having 100 head of children and wives to you can't have no wife. And all that is some type of central way to accommodate homosexuality. Mm-hmm. That from the Greeks and the Romans, it was asexual. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You see, so a lot of these things, a lot of this stuff that we have coming down to us, but now you must understand this though. You must understand this. Now, if you look at history from, let's say, if you're out in space and you're looking at it as a central point, it might not be as tragic, but it's personal to us because we got the rough part of it. But if you try to look at how the world goes, and let me give you an example. The spirit world told us one time that the Bible had to come into existence of a lot of moral code or ethics for the Europeans coming up from the lethargy of barbarism. So they had to have a code book because they didn't have the type of rites of passages, whereas in Africa, you just didn't do things because you were raised in a society that has rites and passages that stuff is not heard of. You see? Whereas these people were coming out of barbarism and they didn't have the type of rites and passages. So they needed a book that they could go to the book and say, don't do this and don't do that. And later on that became the central part of the religion as a code of ethics, but in our honesty, that was a rites of passage for the Europeans. So in so many words, they needed that book. The Bible was central. Look what they did when they got the Bible and how they killed the world. Can you imagine if they didn't have that? You could just imagine when the Romans got out of pocket, threw away their religions. They don't deal with Zeus, which is Jupiter at the time. They don't deal with that, they did the point whereas the Senate and Caesar is God. And look what they could do just by not having a code of ethics. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Not having a code of ethics. So a lot of these things that went on, the reason why the Christianity had to come up out of that, it wasn't written for us. It wasn't for our history. It was for later day Europeans. Now, dealing with that, we have to understand this. Looking back to the ancient Egyptians, Looking back to the ancient Egyptians. First of all, I want to say this about Rome. Rome had to come into being so that even the Africans could have a central experience of living with white people later on. So the Rome had to come in and be brutal, because even what's his name said it. Look, he said Hannibal's father. And Hannibal's father is called a Moor. Even Hannibal's father said, look, those people, the Romans, are people that coming in, and you'll have to deal with them. But what he was trying to say here is that you're going to have this experience. And what I mean by that is this. To this day, black people are at a disadvantage of dealing with white people, because the simple fact that we think that white people think like us, and they don't. You see, we think in a humane way, and we always make the mistake saying, well, this white man, he's gonna deal with this like I would deal with it. And we run up and butt, as they say down south. Because the simple fact, we don't understand, this man has a whole nother mindset. You see what I'm saying? He has a whole nother mindset. You see, our morality is not based on laws and code of ethics. Our morality is based on us being the original humans. Certain things we didn't do, you see what I'm saying? Because we were the blueprint of humanity. Right. We were humanity. So they were saying, look, there's going to be a whole lot of non-human activity. And when you say non-human, let's clear this up. Non-African activity. You see what I'm saying? That's going to hit the world. So Rome has to come into being to be this brutal mirror so that we can have some type of calculation on how to deal with these people. Let me explain what I'm talking about here. Let's say you got a whole bunch of wild animals. You got to put them in a cage, or you got to put them in an area, you got to see what eats this and what eats that, and experiment with them just to see how these people are going to be. You see. Now we know that the Egyptians already knew, because we got text, the text, this guy Alan H. Gardner, which was a great Egyptologist, wrote on these texts. It's a text in France called Abduction Extraordinaire. Never was translated into English, but it says that it talks about these people. He said these people that live in Europe with these mountains, that their way of communication is not a clear one, because they're always grumbling. Because they were saying they even had to be taught how to talk, how to speak. Count Varney talked about that in Ruins of Empire. But in this Egyptian text, they said that these people are always grumbling. They have a reprehensible sex act, which means, you know, whatever got a hold, it don't matter. They can even fuck animals. These are the Egyptian texts. They're over in France and stuff. I was lucky to own one of these, because it was a book came out called Set, the God of Confusion, by T.H. Valdi. It's in most libraries. It's in most college libraries, but it was never published as far as a book for central publication. It's mostly in college libraries and stuff like that. You know, the colleges got books that they never publish to the public. They only publish for the colleges. And this book, Set, the God of Confusion, they actually have these texts from France in there, where they talk about these people, you know, and they say these people do not announce the day of battle. So you have to understand what they're trying to say. They say these people here are unfair. You see, if you have a disagreement, you're all going to come together and you're going to disagree, have the right to disagree. These people here will kill you without you even knowing that you had a problem with them, or they had a problem with you. So it goes into what these texts are trying to say in the Egyptian terms. And these texts may be about 3,000-4,000 years old. And what they were trying to say, they was looking at the Europeans and all, you know what I'm saying? And they were saying, these people are not, they were trying to tell the people, because these were in religious texts, don't look at these people and say that they got the same type of mindset that you have as a human mindset. This is something new that's coming to the earth. So by the time the Romans came, that's why Hannibal and them fathers said, you're going to have to deal with these people. But Hannibal went in and he kicked their ass. They say in one day battle, he killed 70,000. You see. And he kicked their behind, and they said but this is what he did to show you the mindset. Because the Europeans now looking at this said that he came all the way to the gates of Rome. And they said he turned around and went home. They wanted to know, they can't understand, these war generals studied him. And they wanted to know, they couldn't understand, why didn't you go in and take Rome? Like they would have done. If they come in for conquest, they're going to conquer it. You see what I'm saying? And they're going to be there for a couple of 100 years until they fall weak. So they're saying, why didn't you take Rome like they took the Indians or Native Americans over here? Or like they took the South Africans? Why didn't you come in? You had them beat. But what they didn't understand, and to this day, these European generals can't understand why he did his battle, he proved his point, and then he went the fuck home. They couldn't understand why he didn't use Rome as a weapon, as a situation of conquest. It's because that's not his nature. That wasn't his nature to conquer Rome. What he was trying to do was kick them in the ass so he could fortify Carthage for a few more years. You see. And so, you see, so it's a lot of things, which later on, so in so many words, Rome had to be, so that we could have the experience of what atrocities would come, you see what I'm saying, with later European cultures. Which leads us to the Egyptian priests again, because they did it twice. They say, we got to further this information to Greece and Rome. And then, during the time of Muhammad's invasion into Egypt, the Egyptian priests once again said, we have to take this information to Europe. Now why? They said after they closed the last temple, of Isis at Philae. For some reason, I don't know if it was spiritual, they said Europe went into a dark age. I think they went into a dark age because after Rome fell, you see what I'm saying? They never had this. How did Rome fall? Huh?
How did Rome fall?
Well, it deteriorated based on like anything else, from corruption. And Rome fell after its reputation was found out. Rome was weak for a couple of years, but they had killed so many people until they had a reputation, you don't mess with Rome. But remember they said that the German Vandals, they were illiterate, so they didn't get the memo that these people wasn't nothing to fuck with. And they went up in there and kicked Rome ass. You see, so it deteriorated over the years based on corruption. And also they with Constantine, although they say didn't he kill his mother and his daughter or something like that? He turned it into a Christian country and stuff. You see what I'm saying? It was weakened for the simple fact that it meant that they couldn't, if they're going to do the army thing, they're going to have to do it in another fashion. They're going to have the Holy Roman Empire. But it's a Holy Roman Empire. So they got to hide behind the Pope when they do these conquests, but it's not going to be the same might of the Caesars. You see what I'm saying? They're just going to have to just rule in another way. In actuality, they never did fall. They just acquiesced Europe with the religion, so it became a religious domination. You see what I'm saying? A religious domination and stuff. The military fell, but they had a new way to rule. You see, the new way to rule is the same thing when we talked about the Queen of Prince Charles after he got his ass whipped over here, and they couldn't deal with guerrilla warfare. The way these rednecks was over here fighting. They said, no, you go over there, they're going to beat you 100 years. They said, just regroup, and we will take over financially. And then we'll put, because of the finances, we'll put the heads of the government will be connected to the queen. And we'll rule that way, rule through secrecy. So, same thing happened with the Egyptian priests after Egypt fell. They said, well, look, when and Muhammad was still living when the Arabs invaded Egypt. If there was a Muhammad, it could have just been a central priesthood. Because we know Bilal, come to find out, he was the one that wrote the Quran, because if there was a historical Muhammad, he couldn't read or write till the day he died. You see. He couldn't read or write till the day he died, and we knew it was some type of Egyptian, Ethiopian priesthood, just by the central surah of the star, where they mention Sirius in the Quran. You see, the moon, Tahuti, the cow, Hathor. You see, these different things that they did means that this was a part of a mystery system. You see, and in this particular case, it probably was an Ethiopian Cushite mystery system, because we know Arabia was a part of Cush. We know it had to be a Cushite mystery system based on the first 5 books of Moses. You see, it's not a Central Egyptian theme. It's just the third coming of Judeo-Christian. You see. But in that particular case, by that time of them, Ethiopia had usurped the whole Hebrew thing. In parts of Coptic Christianity. So we know who put this thing together. You see what I'm saying? It wasn't translated from Gabriel, but then again, Gabriel could have been a priesthood. But in so many words, after they came and dominated and took over Egypt, the Egyptian priest said, look, Islam is a new conquest tool. You see, to essentially bring Islam into play, they had to fight at Mecca and Medina, and it was a kick-ass machine. So they say this is the same kick-ass machine that conquered Egypt. So what we can do, these Egyptian priests, is we can go under the banner of Islam, take all these sacred texts, and go into Europe, and Islam will be a conquest thing, but the religion would be a mystery system. You see, so all these ancient Egyptian texts and all this ancient stuff that was translated, so here go again, here's another translation point. They took meta, they took Greek, they took Coptic, they took Latin. Remember now, the Egyptian priests had already translated stuff into Latin and translated stuff into Greece. Coptic is later day Egyptian. You got Hebrew. But these Egyptian priests are the authors of all these languages and all these texts. So what they did is they went to Turkey, Baghdad, Salamanca, Spain, and then they translated the Greek, the Latin, the Coptic, the Meta into Arabic. And then they use it as a central force to open up the 16 universities in Europe to teach the European. They stayed there close to 800 years. then whatever they brought to Europe, the European preserved. They had these conferences. They had a conference at Toledo. You get Toledo, Ohio, comes from Toledo, Spain. And from those conferences of Toledo, now this is after that, either right before the expulsion of the Moors in 1492 or right after. They had these conferences of all these texts that the Moors had brought up from Egypt and brought up from around the central ancient world and gave to the Europeans for 800 years, close to 800 years. So they took these texts and they had these periods. They call them Renaissance periods. Now, so what they did is they had these conferences and they had these festivals or conferences or these Renaissance periods in a place called Toledo. And from Toledo, with all those texts and stuff from Toledo, Spain, Cambridge, Oxford, and those early universities around Europe opened from the stuff that they preserved from the Moors. Then, after 1492, and a little bit, a couple of years later, they start having the Renaissance period in Italy. Now remember that this is very key, because you'll hear these white people talk about the Renaissance period. And they'll talk about things like all this learning and all this stuff. Cut off again?
No, I'm changing tapes.
Okay. Whenever you hear the Renaissance period, let me know when you're on.
Yeah, I'm on.
Whenever you hear the Renaissance period in Italy, that was nothing but them acquiescing the Moorish doctrines. You see.
Talk about that for a while.
They talk about these Renaissance periods and they talk about all this great learning and stuff that happened with the Renaissance stuff, from music to art to philosophical points of view that would be the mindset of the European coming from out of the Middle Ages. They talk about the Renaissance period. And all the Renaissance period is the Pope and the Italians taking advantage of the learning that was given to the Europeans for the last 800 years by the Moors. So in so many words, here's another period where they basically take all these ancient doctrines of the Moors or the ancient black man and steal it and say it's theirs. So anytime you hear these great they had one in Toledo. You see. Anytime you have these great things, these great periods, this is nothing but just acquiescing the Moors. The Moors information, like take for instance, you would have different things that would happen that would come about, like trying to give you some examples of your secret societies. What they would do is the secret societies was basically started by the Moors. Let me explain. The Knights Templars, York Rite, Scottish Rite, and all this. So let me explain how this came about. Because a lot of the doctrines after the Moors went to the secret societies too, and then they could sift out the greater knowledge and then give you the several liberal arts and stuff like that. But there's higher degrees of learning that's now become the company of the lodge. Now let me explain how this lodge thing came about. The Moors came in, they created the 16 universities. That's what we can count. We don't know. Okay, let's say if you went to the university and then you got your regular learning, but then you would initiate into a fraternity. Well, the same thing happened in the Moorish science was this. You would come in and they would give you the general learning, and then you would initiate into a higher degree of learning, which now would be the fraternities, which is a ceremonial thing, but at that particular time it was the Masonic orders. So your Masonic order would be equivalent to a fraternity in modern day. So when you went to these universities and stuff, and you got to a certain level, and you learned the general several liberal arts and stuff, and the general several stuff that you learn, which now is all the universities teach. After that, you would go into a Masonic order that was a part of the universities, or a secret society that is a part of the universities. You see what I'm saying? To learn higher degrees of knowledge. We see remnants of that now where you got the Skull and Bones at Yale. So the Skull and Bones at Yale, although you got the people from Yale, but you got a secret society, that all came from the Moors. So what would be the secret societies inside of the universities of the Moors? It would be the York Rite, Scottish Rite, all of these different ones. And then later on, groups like the Rosicrucians that would come up. And what they did is that they took all of this Moorish doctrines. And so a lot of the higher degree stuff became a ward of the Masonic orders. You see what I'm saying? But all this stuff is nothing but stuff that they learned from the Moors. You see, they learned from the Moors. And everything is a series of acquiescing somebody else's paradigms. So the Moors saw a vision. The Moors saw a vision of a country and a place by the setting sun that was not even a civilization yet. It hadn't even come into fruition. And the Moors set out to bring that city on a shining hill that Ronald Reagan talks about in the West. They start America. That's why you so many presidents before George Washington's were all black. Those were Moors. So this whole system over here was set up, you see what I'm saying? By the Moors. And for some reason, because of the Moors conquering Europe, and the Moors being the origin of Americas, for some reason the people who benefited from that deemed the Moor, which means blackface one, or the blacker Moor, or it also means, because anytime you hear the word Sufi, that's another word for the Moors. The word Sufi means woolly-haired one. So instead of saying they'll separate Sufi from the Moor. The Moor was a woolly-haired one. You see, and some reason I don't know if it was after Spain. C. Primadel calls it Manichaeism, racism, with Queen Isabella and those particular ones. They deemed the Moor the enemy.
Who?
The European secret societies that were started by the Moors.
Okay.
You see, it was started by the Moors. For some reason, it's almost as if to say, because you are our teacher, you have to be our enemy.
Is this why during initiation
they come in,
talk about
like Dr. Ben said, when the white Masons or the white secret societies, what they do is whenever their initiates or their neophytes cross over into the initiated, the first thing they do is bring a black man in from wherever, blindfolded, and say, this is your father. Always hold him down.
Why?
They know that civilization originated with us. They know that they are the latter part of that. For some reason, they feel that the only way they can rule is to keep the initiators of civilization down. It's some sick, demented way of thinking. It's a fear, xenophobia. This particular fear, we got to coin a new term for it. It's not the fear of a... Xenophobia is the fear of a person that's unlike you. Different cultures or what have you. We got to coin a new phrase that has to be into the lexicon. And that is a word that will say, you fear a person that you deem is greater than you.
That is correct.
And that's the difference here.
Yeah.
They fear us, and they say that we are the enemies not because we are different. We are the enemies because we are the initiators of civilization, and we gave them all that they have. You see, if you build a TV, you build an airplane, you build anything, the blueprints on what you might later day come to build these things, you got the technology from earlier people. Now you might expound upon it to the point where it's useful to the time you living in, but nevertheless you were not the authors of the blueprint. You were not the master builder. We are the master builders. So you have a fear of our greatness.
Yes.
And because you fear our greatness, you say we always have to be an enemy because they figure our rise is their fall.
Correct.
You see. So they feel that they can be around as long as they want to, as long as we don't rise. And what they don't realize, here it goes again. They are thinking that we're going to do to them like they do to us because they think that humans think like them. No. You see what I'm saying? Your mother and your father, just like our mothers and fathers, would not treat us the same way as a child would treat somebody. You see. And basically, they're incapable of love. Now, I'm not talking about a sensation, because that word is thrown around a lot. You see, I'm not talking about the way somebody make you feel, and you basically react based on this person is giving you a chemical reaction and make you feel a certain way. No, we're talking about reacting based on the way you feel about somebody. It's different. See, if you only reply to me based on the way I make you feel, you see what I'm saying? That's selfish. And it's selfish because you don't know how to feel about somebody, even the fact that they never made you feel a certain way. You understand what I'm saying? You know, so it's the same, so it's this thing, it's this fear that they feel that the society that they're going to be in has to be based on keeping the architects down. Number one, you got to keep them down because you stole every damn thing from them. Just for that to come out, you see what I'm saying, would make you feel inferior. Now, we're thinking like them. We wouldn't think that you're inferior if you inherited a civilization that we put together, but you think that you're inferior, you see what I'm saying, if you told the people, no, they're the architects of this thing. So it's some psychological sick and twisted stuff. You see what I'm saying? But nevertheless, what we have a problem with is understanding people's thoughts, people's mentalities, people's temperament. You see what I'm saying? And we as black people get caught up in that because we think that they think like us.
Yeah.
You see. But all this had to be. You know, all this stuff had to be in the particular aspect because, let me give you, you said, well, why did this have to be this way? Well, look, let's just take the Moors. Because some people say, well, you know, we might have had another history if the Moors didn't go into Spain and go into Europe and educate them. Well, let's look at it this way. If we knew we were going into a state of dormancy, going to sleep, civilization was going to go out of our hands, based on just age, based on, like Dr. Ben said, time just ran out.
Seasons.
If we knew this, wouldn't you rather, and you knew a younger, savage people going to take over, wouldn't you try to want to educate them? So whenever you start to wake up out of your dormancy, you would have some sense of education and some sense of civilization. It's not the perfect, it's only a shadow of what we did. But can you imagine what would happen if you didn't educate him at all?
Oh, yeah.
And you came out of your dormancy and he's taking over the world. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In barbarism.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew if we didn't educate them, you see, then when we did start to wake up, we wouldn't even have a pseudo-education. We wouldn't have anything. If we just get back part of what we gave them, there's things in us that we can preserve. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. And be at a better position. Yeah. We can look at the white man and say he came from the caves and preserved some stuff from us and started ruling. We got to have something so we were advanced enough to see the future, know that we had to do certain things. You see. Because if we didn't give these children this, when we did wake up from out of our dormancy, we wouldn't have nothing. Look how bad it is when we woke up. Yeah. Can you imagine if he didn't get shit? Nothing. You see. So, our pyramids, from the pyramids, or from the pharaohs to Negroes, you understand?
Yeah.
In so many words, it's not necessarily a tragedy as it is a process. Now, going back to the timeline, if you rule for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, what transpired in the last 2,000 years is a recess. Because you got to understand something now. They said that the European would only rule for a short period of time. You see, we look at civilizations, America is falling off the hinges right at a little over 200 years. You see, so we understand that, you know, this stuff it doesn't last forever. It's going to spin itself out. You see, so it's going to spin itself out. But then again, on the other hand, it's a recess compared to how long we rule.
Yes.
You see, on that particular level, you see, and you know, and not unless somebody wipes you out on a genocide level like the Tasmanians or the Aborigines, you still endure. Now it might be at a certain level, but nevertheless, nothing is ever really destroyed. You see? Sure. We gave him a version of pharaonic society. To this day, we can look at certain things and say that came out of Egypt. You see? That came out of Egypt. So we look at things like that. So here goes again. From the pyramids to the projects,
from pyramid to Negro,
is a process more than it is and a recess. more than it is a failure. You see. We got texts. Even the Bible says the Son of Man will rise in the west.
Yes.
The Book of the Dead, one of the names for Osiris is Osiris Winnefer. And Osiris Winnefer means the great westerner. Amenta, the land of Amen, is in the west. The sun sets in the west. You see. So all this is a process for us to be in the west. Now, we go into one other part about this thing, how this transpires to us. Now, on the genetic level. On the genetic level. They say, out of Egypt I will call my son. Or out of Africa I will call my son. You had these Africans, some people call them tribes, some people call them nations, but they were scattered. They had broken apart and they were nations. So in order to make it a covenant, make it whole again, you got to extrapolate an African body out to another land. And then you have to come in and extrapolate several different African tribes or African cultures out. And then you have to genetically mix them back together to make the whole African. You see. Let me give you an example. So they say that they talked about it two ways. They say that they used to take these large bodies of Africans and put them in the Caribbean. And then those Africans threw off their oppressors called the Maroon Societies, and they had these revolts. So they decided, look, we're going to take them to America and break them into small lots. But it won't be one nation that can take over. It'll be different African tribes from all over Africa. And we'll break them into small lots and intermarry them or intermingle them. And so as a result, the Westerner that they're talking about, or especially the African American, represents the putting back together of all the Africans' tribes through the DNA. Because the African in this country has all of the different African tribes in its DNA. In its DNA. You know, in its DNA. Okay. You see. Put back together. Even the Schomburg in 2000, they said, well, you know, our story is a very unique story. Because our story as far as African Americans is not only where did we come out of Africa, but they intermix all different nations of Africa together in the DNA. You see? Because they didn't have the big lots of African that could come together and overthrow people based on big unity. So they broke them up into smaller pieces in America. And as a result, you got a new creation of the original. You got a new creation of the original. You see, so in so many words, the coming of the African to the West is actually the coming together of a new being that would be an even greater creation. Because it has all the elements of all the different Africans, and including all the different races in the world in it.
That's true.
You see. And that's that's putting back the body of Osiris. It was cut up into several pieces. But he'll be put back in the west. You see. Putting back the body of Osiris. So we saw all of this coming. We knew it was going to happen thousands of years before it happened. And we worked through hell, you see what I'm saying, to get a product together that we're really not even, we don't even know the power we hold now.
That's right.
Just by going through slavery. You see. We got texts coming from the Library of Alexandria of a group of people. They said a group of, we'll say Phoenicians. See, in that way, because if we put it back on the continent, we'll say group of Africans. And they said they took the group of Africans and put them together in a boat. But they were the greatest heroes. It's in the text, Jason of the Argonauts. He took the great heroes, they say from around Greece, but actually from around Phoenicia. Or we could say Greek because that was a black culture too. And they put the greatest ones in one boat to sail to the ends of the earth to get the golden fleece. And the golden fleece, in so many words, is the earlier version of what you would call the Christ now. So in order to make this Christ, they took the best of us, put him in a boat, sailed to the ends of the earth to get the golden fleece. You see, well, that's what happened with us. The best of us came united in the West, put back together after a separation of Osiris. You see, and the thing about it here is we just don't know what happened because we're still looking at the victim side of it. History shows you tragedy, yes, but there's a silver lining to what actually happened. It's a process. You see, and as a result, we can tell you right now, who had the resurgence, because they talk about in the last days, in the Gospel of Thomas, which was one of the books they took out of the Bible from the Conference of Nicaea. They say in the last days, all things that were hidden will come to manifest, and knowledge will be quickened. In the last 20 years, who was the ones that brought this knowledge back? Although we had several Africans and several people from the Caribbean and stuff, but as far as the knowledge being presented, it is an American phenomenon. You see, because Africa, you know, you got places they don't even have access to books. Even in the Caribbean, they got places they don't even have access to the libraries like this. So this phenomenon that we call the Afrocentric movement or the Black Conscious movement, although it's made up of different people from the diaspora, the underpinning of it is an African-American phenomenon. So here again, just that alone lets you know, in all honesty, it shows the African being put back together in the West. It's a Western phenomenon. You see. So on one hand, you're looking at tragedy, you're not even noticing what just transpired within the last 20 years, 25 years. You see. Because everything has to start with ideas coming back together, otherwise you don't have nothing if you don't have knowledge. Know thyself. You see? And we know that phenomenon happened in the West. You see? So it's amazing. You got any questions?
Well, maybe we should call this from Pharaoh to Negro to what? A new humanity?
Pharaoh, from Pharaoh to Negro to new humanity.
Bobby, any words in closing you'd like to say to our people who are watching this?
Yeah, I think they say never look at the apparent. when you look at, like I said before, the Barack Obama thing. Now, a lot of people are getting disappointed based on the policies and things didn't transpire and stuff like that. We're not talking about that. The phenomenon, and even though they might have been sinister moves on the reason why people put him in, nevertheless, they don't know that although they put him in thinking it's one way, they don't know that they are tools of the spirit that's working. So they might say, this is a conspiracy. This is sinister. We're going to put this man in because we have a certain agenda. But what they don't realize is an unseen hand, spirit's hand, that put him in for a spirit purpose, just for the psychological phenomenon of black people having something we never had before. You see, it's like the guy Eugene Robinson. He works for the Washington Post. He said, I could tell my daughters about black teachers, black lawyers. Every job in this country, they got something. He said, but I never could tell them about no president. He said, that's wiped out now, because we've already done that. You see, so for a psychological purpose of seeing a black man and a dark-skinned, bootylicious wife. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. She is the quintessential black woman, the one that went through the process of slavery. Because see, now the white wing Republicans are saying Barack Obama is not an African American because his mama's white and his daddy's Kenyan. Now all of a sudden they are saying, before, if you a slave, you ain't shit. But now they're saying he didn't go through the slave phenomenon, so he's not authentic. Don't matter. Michelle Obama is up in there, and her show got from the Pharaohs to the Negroes. You see what I'm saying? But my point here is this. If you are African in the 1800s or the 1600s that came over, if you are African from the 16 or the 1500s that came over, and you met up with a slave master, and you became a mulatto, what's the difference in the 1600s becoming a mulatto or becoming a mulatto in 1961? What's the difference? If an African and a white person united, what's the difference? And that's basically, when you look at it, that's all African Americans are anyway. We didn't come over here these different hues. So the point I'm trying to make here is, they're trying to run this game, but nevertheless, Michelle, not only did she come to the White House, she took her mama with her. You see, and the mama is there for protection because she knows the juju. You see, from South Carolina, Barack Obama ain't stupid. He put her in the mix because the mother knows the mysteries. She knows the African sciences to keep him protected. She knows the roots. She knows the conjuration of African science. You call it voodoo, you call it roots, you call it Santeria, you call it Yoruba, you call it Obeah, or whatever you call it. You call it juju, you call it hoodoo. Whatever the deal is an African science. She's the African scientist. She's there for protection. That's why he brought her there. So what you do, so that you don't make it so they see her going down to botanicas, picking up the herbs and the roots and stuff, because our people have been taught against that. Our sciences, they take the herbs and the roots and build them in the White House lawn, call it a garden, put a few cabbages and a few tomatoes up in there, a few okra and give it to the little people and stuff and feed them. And nevertheless, she can go in that garden right now and pull the herbs that she needs, because they plant those too. Just to keep Barack Obama protected. Because even though they might be the people who put him there might say, no, we want him to survive because we need him as a tool, but they always got these crazy people out here. You see, that can't stand a black man being up in there. You see. And as a result, he's protected from all of that. You see.
Are you trying to say that he is divinely placed?
Yes, even though the people, in order to get him there, they had to be convinced that it's a sinister thing, that it's something that they thinking it's their agenda. He's divinely placed, but he's not divinely placed based on politics. See, politics is their agenda. When it comes to us, not only does it represent a self-worth, but it also represents a sign and a symbol of the coming together of us taking back the world. So that inauguration that they had, you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. They had the same inauguration in ancient Egypt. They used to have inauguration for the Pharaoh in ancient Kemet. You see. And that inauguration represented the divine king in the double White House. Now, is he the divine king? No. The DNA of black people are divine king. To celebrate, he represents the symbol of the divine kingship of the new kingdom. But the new kingdom is our DNA. Our Christhood coming into being. So the Pharaoh was a representative of God on earth, but of the people being the gods of the earth. You see. Mm-hmm. The word Pharaoh, they now translated as Pharaoh Heru. And Heru means pineal gland. And if you got a pineal gland and functioning melanin, they're talking about your DNA and your rising to a high level. So that's what it represents. So don't get it twisted that Barack Obama, the actual human, is Christ. You see. But he represents the coming of the putting back together of Osiris in the West. So they had an inauguration in the White House, the double White House in Egypt. They also have an inauguration in America now, when that black man who represents the Pharaoh returning. You see, there's a book, Rosemary Clark's book, Secret Traditions in Ancient Egypt. She got one called Sacred Magic in Ancient Egypt. I think it's the first one. Sacred Traditions in Ancient Egypt. They talk about the inauguration period. Mm-hmm. That guy, R.H. de Lubitz, spending 15 years at Karnak Temple and Luxor Temple, chronicle that inauguration period in his works. She printed it in her works, but his book is Wisdom of the Temple is one of those books. R.H. de Lubitz. So she reprinted some of those concepts and all, which we had preserved from the Temple of Karnak and the Temple of Luxor of its inauguration that goes on in the White House, the double White House. Mm-hmm. So all of this stuff comes together. You see, all this stuff comes together. And even got the priests up in there. See, the priests ran the pharaohs. Well, his mother, she represents that priest. Well, Michelle's mother represents that priest thing. So symbolically, we talk about something that's not the apparent. We talk about spiritual forces behind the scene. Mm-hmm. You see. Spiritual forces behind the scene. Nothing is never truly lost. It just changes another form. You see. Mm-hmm. That's some interesting stuff, you see. You know, so it's you know, so when you have to look at it and stuff. I think a lot of times we have been suffering so long until we reduced down to looking at the apparent. And the apparent looks dismal. This thing out here to run you crazy. But there's another order on the scene. Give you an example. Since 2008 with the meltdown, the financial meltdown, white people are going through hardships. Unemployment, foreclosures on houses, and all of that. So they are now forced to live in a realm, you see what I'm saying, that they haven't lived since the Great Depression. Spoiled by the fatted calf. But in that realm, we rule. Because we've acclimated ourselves, you see what I'm saying, in living in certain conditions. So they say, in the kingdom of the blind, a one-eyed man is king. In this particular case, we are the kingship. Because black people ain't tripping. White people is marching, taking over, occupied, all these movements going on and all that kind of thing, because the country is not what it used to be. Well, it's the same damn country for us as it always was. But we have conditioned ourselves. You see what I'm saying? That now, it's no big deal to us. It's not our hardship. So they say, God puts the ones that he loved through harsh conditions. They say, so that they can inherit a greater kingdom. It is the ones that he don't love, or she doesn't love, that make life go so easy for her. So when stuff falls for them, they won't have no kingdom to inherit. You see, because you got all your stuff here. You got your kingdom here. But the ones they put through the harsh conditions, they're inheriting a kingdom. And in so many words, that's a whole new way of life. We don't even know it, but we are living off of DNA. We are living off of certain things here. And it's spiritual, and it's health hazard, because we don't even know we're doing it. Mm-hmm. We don't know we're doing it. Mm-hmm. You see. So pretty soon they're going to have manuals for white people how to survive through the black methodology. We're going to have to teach them. So it's amazing stuff, you see. You can learn a lot from some people that done gone through hell.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. You see. You know, they had some hard times too, but see, the eating was good at least the last 60, 70 years. Mm-hmm. They got whole things on now where white people experienced affirmative action in the 1950s, in the late 40s. They said it half, because white people went into, okay, now you got the Depression, that meant that everybody in this country was poor. So, how did white people get back on top when the playing field was the same in the 1930s? How did they get back on top and we remain at a certain level? They got back on top because they had affirmative action. They talk about all the programs that they put in to raise white people up to becoming the richest country on earth at a certain time. It was through affirmative action. And then they're going to tell you about affirmative action. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They said all the programs from the late 40s, the 1950s, and the 60s was to put white people at a certain advantage. And it's a form of affirmative action. There's a book out on when white America, when affirmative action was white, written by a white man. Something like that, yeah, so it's interesting. So I tell you, is there any questions?
No, Bobby, we're going to get you to the airport.
Yeah.
But we certainly appreciate your time, and we appreciate this lecture.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure that people will get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
So, Bobby, again, we want to thank you, and
Right.
we look forward to your next visit.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
safe journey back to Georgia.
I tell you. All right.
Yeah.